how did you either find your way to the iPhone, or how did the iPhone find its way to you?
Well, the iPhone had a very circuitous route by itself. I mean, I at that point was running like Mac OS 10, so I ran each of the releases at that point, and we've been working on a tablet project, which has a really odd beginning. It began because Steve hated this guy at Microsoft. That is the actual origin of it. And it wasn't Bill, because he was starting to like Bill by this point. It was Laureen had a friend, so Steve's wife had a friend who was married to a guy who worked at Microsoft. Every time Steve had any social interaction with that guy, he'd come back just pissed off. And I mean, it was not in like Microsoft's, like, you know, it was not good for them that he ever saw him. And he came back one time after seeing this guy, and that guy was talking about how Microsoft had solved computing. They solved like laptop computing, or they were going to do laptop or tablet computing, and they're going to do it with pens. And he just like shoved it in Steve's face the way they were going to like rule the world with their new tablets with their pens. And Steve came in on Monday, and there was a set of expletives, and then it was like, let's show them how it's really done. It's like, the first thing is, they're idiots. You don't use a stylus. You know, it's cumbersome. You lose it. You're always like picking it up and putting it down. We're born with 10 styluses. Style I. So like, let's use the ones that we don't have to sell. And so he's like, and this at the time, touch screens were resistive touch.
Yep.
Resistive requires you to sort of deform the screen. You have to push it down. So if you look at it like text and everything looks bad, it's really tiring on your finger. He said, we need to do capacitive touch, and it has to be multi-touch. So we went to the hardware team and basically said, like, go do this. And they started, and the design team started building designs around this idea of multi-touch. And it was pretty interesting. I remember one of the first demos of this. You walked into a room. There's a giant, giant table. There's a projector on the ceiling, and you can, like, you see a photo or something on the table, and you could move your finger around the table, and it would move the photo. It's super cool. It wouldn't fit in, you know, your bathroom, much less your pocket, or your bag at the time, I guess, if you're doing a tablet. But the moment you saw that, you knew this was the way to go. Like, that was cool.
So it was pretty quickly you were sold. You thought Steve was right, that stylus wasn't the right way to go. You saw your way forward.
No question. No question. I'd had devices with a stylus, and I hated them. Like a Trio, I mean, there's cool things about it, but like you'd always lose that stylus, and you're always like, you're trying to pull it out, and you're typing, and then you're going back. It was just slow and cumbersome. So that thing was great. Now, how do we get to the iPhone? A few things happened at the same time. Apple was turning from a computer company, in fact, we would call it Apple Computer Inc., to an electronics company, Apple Inc. And I think half of our sales at the time were iPods. So we were turning into this consumer electronics company. We were always looking at what was going to take over the iPod space. Like, was something going to cannibalize music sales and iPod sales? And the one thing that seemed like it might do it would be phones. Everyone was starting to carry phones, and you could try to put music on your phone. Now, you mentioned the rocker earlier. You can do it like that, and then phones would never have taken over anything. And I think that was like Steve had heard, the Razor, and the Razor was thin, and that's all it was. It was thin. Possible to use, but it was thin.
Yeah.
And so he's like, rocker, okay, it's spelled like, R-O-K-R, that's cool spelling. It must be just like the Razor, and it comes, and it's, like this big, and it's ugly, and 100 songs. So anyway, there was a thought that phones might cannibalize sales of iPods, and so we thought about that. But the other thing, I remember I was sitting with Steve at lunch one time, and we were both using our phones, and we both had these phones, and we hated them. And we started talking, and we looked around, like, everyone around us has a phone. and everyone looks very angsty as they're using them. Like no one, it seems like it's a pleasurable thing to use the phone, but it's a nice thing for communication. Yeah. And Steve said, "Do you think we could take that demo we're doing with the tablet and multi-touch and shrink it down to something big enough or small enough to fit in your pocket? It'd be a phone size with that same touch technology." So we went back to the design team, and they took and carved out a little corner of it and made this very simple demo. I'm pretty sure it was Boss who did it, and Boss is one of the best. And he made this thing. It was a simple list of names, and you would, with your finger, you would drag along. It probably had the rubber banding and all. I mean, it's magical. You dragged along, and you tap on a name, and it would slide across and reveal the card. So phone number, email. You tap on a phone number, and it would say calling. It wasn't calling, it wasn't doing anything, but it said calling. The second you saw this demo, you knew this was it.
The future.
There was no question. This is the way that a phone had to behave. Yeah. Steve saw it and said, "Okay, put the tablet on hold. Let's build a phone. Let's build a phone based on multi-touch." Yeah. And that's what we did. So immediately, the design team, we all got around and started designing the iPhone based on that technology. And the hardware team had the Herculean task of then shrinking that whole thing down into something that could fit in your pocket.
Yeah. Now, there was this other component of this. Steve famously said in 2005, "We're not very good at going through orifices to get to the end user." Do you remember that? This was at All Things D in 2005.
Yeah. This is referring to all the carrier stuff.
Yeah.
The carriers, that was an interesting thing. Now, I have to say, like, I came into this as a platform guy and a design guy, but I knew nothing about phones. Like, I had no right to lead any team doing a phone. I'd never heard of GSM or CDMA before we started the iPhone. In fact, the first text I ever sent was on my iPhone. And because texting on everything else was horrid. And so we started meeting with carriers. We need some solution. So we talked about, do we do an MVNO? Do we license, do we white box a carrier solution through some other carrier? Do we buy spectrum and build out an entire network ourselves? Do we partner with one? And so we started looking at what it would mean to partner, and we'd meet with these carriers, and man, I had no idea. Carriers at some point realized that handset manufacturers were terrible. Terrible at user interface, terrible at consistency, and carriers thought they'd be better than that. And so they would give us these things, hundreds of pages of line items saying, here's all the things your phone has to do. If it's in this category, phone has to do all these things. I would look at it like, there's no way my phone does that. There's no way. And I look at the manual, I'm like, oh my God. If you do like 16 things and you do a jig, you can do multi-way calling.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable. And so we started talking with these carriers, and we said, we know a little thing about user design, user-oriented design. And so here's the deal. You do the network. We will agree that the lowest level of our phone that talks to your network, you can give us a spec for that. Every single thing above that, you have no say. You don't even know what we're doing. Like, we're just going to go do it. You have no say. And, what do you say? And, like, meeting end. We weren't really negotiating on that. And they'd say, like, well, what about this? And we're like, what about, like, no say? Do you not understand? And when Singular came in, and they would send like 4, 5, 6, almost always guys in suits, to explain some of their technology. And when Singular came in, it was one person. It was this woman, Chris Rennie, and she had no slides, and she sat there and she went to the whiteboard and explained stuff, which was phenomenal. I was sold right there. Like, she knew the technology well, and they agreed. They said, okay, you'll decide all the top stuff, and we'll just make sure it works well with our network. And so they signed this deal with us. And
you hadn't demoed for them at that point. They had no idea what you were doing.
We hadn't really started it yet.
What was the most underappreciated advance of the original iPhone? That's a hard question.
When the original iPhone came out, the reviews didn't get it. The reviews talked about number of clicks. Oh, to send an email, it takes you, 6 taps or something. You have to tap into mail, you have to tap and tap, tap, tap. And so it was being compared against other smartphones at the time, BlackBerry et al., according to the metrics people thought were important at the time. They didn't get it. What they didn't get was we were changing the entire paradigm. We were changing the entire way things were done. And it wasn't about how many taps. It was that someone who would never figure out that BlackBerry because they didn't have a law degree and a law firm that made them carry that crackberry around 24/7 would never figure out. And that's what I think people missed. And the sales at the beginning, it was nice, but it wasn't what I expected. Because the first time I saw the demo, the first time I saw us, with a working prototype, the first time I used it, I was amazed by it. I was blown away by it. And there's a question you asked at the last panel that, did you think it was going to be super successful? And for me, at some point, about halfway into our development, I thought, we're not using this like a real phone. We use it in the office. We don't use it outside of the office. And it's because we had all these 6 lockdown areas, and, we had the sign that said Fight Club, because, the first rule of purple is you don't talk about purple. And I thought, we need to take this out and use it as a real phone. And so I decided I'm going to do it. And I asked Steve just to make sure, and he said, sure, go for it. Give me one, too. And I said, not yet. Because there's all this configuration you had to do, and he wouldn't have, he would have been annoyed at that point. And so one day I slipped an iPhone into my right pocket, I had my flip phone in my left pocket, and I walked out 4 lockdown areas into the parking lot. And I was terrified. Because I was certain, this is the day I'm getting mugged on the way home. So I moved around, I went to my car, I drove a different route home. I literally talked to an FBI agent about how you try to be careful and look for people following you. And I got home and I closed all the drapes and doors, and I started using it. And I would use it all the time. But I always had, only people at work plus Steve had that phone number. And so if it rang, I knew it was someone from work. I'd try to duck into a bathroom. I'd try to duck into, someone's house, into an empty room. And I'd pull it out and I'd try to use it. And it never felt like work to use it. It always felt amazing. It always felt special. And so I knew this is going to be huge. And so months go on. I'm using it every day. Finally, Steve's like, Scott, I'm the CEO. I get to make these decisions sometimes. You're giving me a phone. And so probably someone in this room set up a phone for him and gave it to him. And then the two of us were the only 2 people in the world who were carrying phones around, iPhones around. And he'd call me up all the time. He'd be like, 11 o'clock on a Saturday and be like, I'm at this friend's house, but they're boring, so I'm in the bathroom. And I'm wondering about the touch sensation on photos and the way you pinch. It doesn't seem like it's quite right. And so I'd take mine out, and I'd sit there, and we'd be talking about it. And then he's like, oh, and I think the color of this icon is off by, a little bit. And so we'd sit there, and half an hour later, he'd be like, oh, someone's knocking at the bathroom. They must think I'm really constipated. And he'd hang up, and he'd call me back at 1. But using it in that context, using it, it never felt like work. And I knew this is it. Everything's going to behave this way, and this will be successful. And, pricing and other things, there was a challenge to get it to the right business deal for a consumer to get it. But there was no doubt in my mind this was huge.